friend or your group of female friends, female empowerment almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And governments really need to acknowledge the range of strategies that gambling companies are using to attract new customers. We predicted that the gambling industry would do this because of the playbook of tactics from the tobacco industry. It's almost copy for copy. So the government's really behind on this one, and they need to be ensuring that they act on and restrict some of this harmful marketing.
Are there other ways we can tackle this before they get their way and addict the half of the population they haven't already addicted?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if we look at public health campaigns at the moment that aim to raise awareness of gambling harm, women are often quite stigmatized in those campaigns. They're often presented as the girlfriends to the men who gamble, and they don't present the reality that shows that women are gambling with their friends and partners and are susceptible to the tactics of the gambling industry. So I think what's important is we need to stop the narrative that this is only an issue for young men, and responses need to take into account women and young girls, their exposure to gambling advertising, as well as how this may lead to more women engaging in gambling in the future.
Yeah, and hear all these things as an attempt to normalise it, that you can't have normal human interactions, whether it's between a group of guys or a group of female friends. You can't have, this is the image, this is the message constantly, isn't it? If friendship doesn't exist without this means of gambling as a shared interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw this with the ads around Rihanna's the first song they were going to perform. A lot of people on TikTok were talking about how they think she's going to start the performance. And then here comes the marketing from the gambling industry that says, how about you take what you're already having conversations about with your friends and take that and bet on it. So we're adding betting into conversations that don't actually need it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating little dive into the way the gambling message is changing and trying to grab in this new audience. Hey, Simone, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Dr. Simone McCarthy from the Institute for Health Transformation at Deakin University. The gambling industry, the online gambling industry in particular, reaches out often through influencers, and the idea of novelty bets on things like Rihanna and her song choice tries to reach out to a new female audience.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
On the roads of Beverly Hills, King George's Road at Stony Creek Road, a truck breakdown there, 1 of 4 northbound lanes closed, that's lane 1. At Wetherill Park, the Horsley Drive at Cowpasture Road, a truck breakdown there, northbound traffic is affected. If you're in Clyde, M4 motorway just past the Church Street on-ramp, 3 vehicles involved in a crash there, significant delays westbound. And at Northmead, Bryans Road approaching Kleins Road, a van breakdown with 1 eastbound lane closed. Last one is North Sydney, Warringah Freeway approaching Falcon Street. We've got a truck breakdown there with 1 northbound lane closed. It's Lou is the other thing that a few people have pointed out, the way that they act sometimes within the hour when the Reserve Bank puts up interest rates to increase the mortgage rate, but then the term deposits follow at a very slow pace. This is just on the text. Just this morning I was talking to our bank about the poor savings rate they offer compared to the mortgage rate. They could offer a 0.15% increase. Oh, aren't they generous? Although it's interesting, you have to complain to even get that, right? But they complained, and so they at least get something. The bank's final comment: your complaint will go through to our complaints team to assess, and depending on how many complaints they receive pertaining to the same issues, changes can and will be made. This is kept on file for you, and in future, if you choose to bank with us again, it may assist in providing you a better service and a better rate. I hope you can enjoy the rest of your day, Margaret, they said. Is there anything else I can help you with today? As Margaret says, what a joke. We'll talk a bit about the ACCC's action a little later. It's currently 4:20 here on ABC Radio Sydney. 26 degrees in the city, 28 in Camden. In Gosford, it's 24. In Mount Boyce, it's 22. Penrith is 29. And in Cronulla, 26 degrees. Partly cloudy today. Tomorrow, the chance of fog in the outer west in the early morning. Should be sunny, though. A minimum of 18 and a maximum of 28 degrees. Finance coming up in a moment.
G'day, this is Josh Zepps, the host of Afternoons with Josh Zepps, obviously. And you know what's on this Sunday? It's Mardi Gras Fair Day, and I will be in the thick of it, broadcasting into the weekend's show from the fair, bringing you all the outdoor fun. Don't miss it, Sunday from 10 a.m. to midday with me, Josh Zepps, the host of Afternoons with Josh Zepps, live from Fair Day this Sunday.
Celebrate Sydney World Pride 2023.
ABC Radio Sydney.
And just on the text, thank you for this. 4-car crash on the Harbour Bridge southbound. And traffic, according to my texter, is held up way back. And Ian Verinder, our ABC Business Editor, is here. Good afternoon.
G'day, Richard.
Yeah,
How
we
you
had a big down day today.
did off more than 1% today. And look, Wall Street had a slightly mixed performance overnight. So we really outdid the selling on Wall Street. And look, some inflation numbers came out overnight in New York or Washington. And look, they showed that inflation is continuing to trend downwards in the States. Not as much as a lot of people had hoped or expected. But we've seen 7 months straight of declines in inflation in the US on an annual basis, at least. There were some indications that some sectors, were ticking back upwards. But it's down to 6.4%. And you think back to last June when it peaked at 9.1, it definitely has come off quite a lot.
Yeah, and that's the hope here too, isn't it, that the worst is over?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the Commonwealth, we've just been talking about the banks and this gap between what you pay for a mortgage and what you get on a term deposit. The ACCC has launched an inquiry today into that gap and into the speed at which higher rates are offered in one case, but not the other. Interesting in that context, the Commonwealth Bank's record profit today.
It is, but look, all the banks were heavily sold off today after the Commonwealth Bank's record profit, and they're the reason for the market dropping so heavily today. So all of the banks were down. The Commonwealth was down 5.7% on this record half-year profit and a big lift in the dividend. And it's all because a lot of analysts have taken the view that what's known as the net interest margin, that's the gap between what they pay for deposits and what they charge to lend out in loans, that gap has peaked and it's actually going to start to narrow.
Okay, why? Why will it narrow since they've been getting away with it?
Well, look, it's not really that they're getting away with. I'll explain how it works. There's a whole lot of deposits that we have money in the bank where we get virtually no interest for. Your savings account.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah,
nothing, right? So there's a huge amount.
You know that at tax time because you look it up and you think, I better pay some tax on
$2.57
or nothing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of deposits out there that earn absolutely zero in terms of interest, and it's really only term deposits and investment accounts, investment savings accounts where they compete and actually offer decent interest rates on there. So when interest rates are falling and the banks are cutting, mortgage rates and everything, you've got this whole rump of money and deposits that they don't have to pay out on. So the margins get squeezed right down because they can't drop the lower, all their deposit rates. Now, when
it's already zero.
Yeah. So when it's moving the other way, such as now, and interest rates are rising, you've got a whole lot of money that they're not paying out on, and they're lending out on money at a much higher rate. I mean, look, banking is the same as selling apples or anything else. Your profit margin is that bit in the middle between what you're paying for the product and what you're selling it for. And so,
but there's supposed to be competition to stop that. That's the theory, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. That's the theory. That's right. So the competition, though, is all around this. It's all around term deposits, and it's all around deposits where you lock your money in for a certain period of time, where there's restrictions about how much you can pull in and out. Whereas a savings account, you can go down and pull it all out, whatever you want to do. Look, if you break a term deposit, you actually give up the return that you're getting there. So, it's all about those restrictions.
I think the other thing, why it's an imperfect world, is that you tend to be sticky to your own bank because it's easier. So you don't, I was looking today at the term deposits, and I think, Westpac and Commonwealth Bank, if you, this is $10,000 for a year, Westpac is offering 2.7, I think I looked up, on CanStar, but the small institutions are offering 4.2. So, but can someone be bothered, I suppose, anyhow, having to prove their identity with another institution, putting the money in there, and the difficulty that they haven't got access through their ordinary bank account?
If you walk into your bank and you say, I'm going to go and, go to this other mob and get 4.2, I'll bet you suddenly get a better rate, Yeah,
better rate. But my texter said she did that today and with one of the big banks, and she has got a better rate. It's up by 0.15%.
Oh, okay, right.
0.1.
There you go, better than nothing,
Better than nothing.
But look, there's there's loyalty earns you nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a proven fact that it's new customers that get all the showered with gifts. Whereas if you're a loyal customer and you've been there for half a century, it's you're bolted on, you're not going anywhere. We don't have to do anything for you.
Give him $5 and a tap on the bum.
I mean, one thing though about this, everyone's talking about the mortgage cliff and so forth. The banks are all expecting a lot of competition for refinancing, right? So they're expecting everybody to go out in the market once they're coming off their fixed rates and going to variable rates and saying, I need a decent deal here. So they're expecting that they're going to have to fight to keep people on board, once those...
Well, that's going to be difficult for some people because the house prices drop so much, they'll find that the other institution the competing institution won't want to take them on at all.
That's right. So it's not going to be pretty for a lot of people, but there's a lot of others who are going to, find themselves being able to negotiate a slightly better deal, as difficult and as painful as it will be, but slightly better than it would have otherwise been.
So, I grant it. The market says that things are going to be slightly tougher for the banks, bring out world's smallest violin. But still, break it to me. What was the Commonwealth Bank's profit?
It was $5.2 billion for the half year. So they're well and
half year?
Yeah, that's right. So they're well and truly on the way to break into double figures here for the full year, $10 billion.
Yeah, all right, $10 billion. Now, Philip Lowe pleading his case at Senate estimates, of course.
I've got to say to you, Richard, that, having watched it today, it's quite remarkable that the level of intelligence from some of the people who are our elected leaders. It was extraordinary to watch.
You think that they don't necessarily have an economics degree?
Economics degree, high school diploma, I don't know. It was extraordinary to watching some of it. But
the questions he was asked.
Yeah, they were stupid sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, but I think he actually gave us a fairly good account of himself. I mean, he did make the point. He said, look, I'm not the Reserve Bank, I'm one of the people who sits on the board. And he said, I know it all comes back to me all the time and I'm the one to blame, but, I'm not the only one making a decision here. We sit down, there are 9 of us sitting around that boardroom table and we all make a decision and we all go through all the information and we do what we hope is the best for the country. And he said, look, we have got it wrong, but hopefully we'll be able to navigate our way through this. But
and I guess the other thing he said, which is not part of the debate for some reason, is how bad inflation is. Everyone's aware of the pain now of high interest rates, and it is incredibly painful for those people with mortgages. But we don't seem to acknowledge that what they're trying to do is stop the worst pain of all, which is built-in long-term inflation, which destroys people's lives and savings almost like nothing else.
Yeah, look, there's a big debate going on within the economics world, though, is this blunt tool of interest rates, is this the only thing you can use to kill inflation? And are we using the wrong measures anyway to, there's this old theory out there that, the Phillips curve, where you've got to get people unemployed to break inflation. Well, does that really hold true anymore? There's a lot of people who argue, no, it doesn't. And so the problem is with this lag that's involved in it all, you're pushing interest rates higher and higher. You're not really going to get you're slamming your foot on the brake and the economy is not going to really slow down for another 6 months. Have you hit too hard?
But the trouble is that a lot of it's a great intellectual argument. I read the excellent piece by one of your colleagues in the Herald, in the ABC website, talking about some of the various methods and quoting an essay that John Maynard Keynes wrote in 1936 or something. A lot of these other methods, they're intriguing, but they can't be brought in tomorrow. So some people say, okay, the much better method would be put up the GST, for instance, because then you tax everyone's spending. If you if your aim is to reduce spending, put up the GST. Well, that's fine. I think that sounds very sensible, but that's not going to happen. There's no political will for that.
No.
It's certainly not going to happen tomorrow if you did want to try to put it to an election or something like that. The other method is some sort of form of forced savings so that you can say, well, during this period where we're trying to reduce spending, we're going to make sure that wages, a proportion of everyone's wages are either held back by the boss and given back to you later or put into your superannuation and given. Now, again, it's a great theory because it means that the excess money that you're trying to remove still stays adhered to the person rather than being given to a big bank.
Yeah.
Sounds great. But again, It's not going to happen tomorrow.
No,
it's not an answer to our current problem.
The political will just isn't there to do it. But I think the argument is formulating at the moment, and it is out there. I mean, there's a very small percentage of people who are going to be hit very, very hard by these interest rates. And is that really the way to do it? To, inflict all the pain onto just a small section of the population, mostly young people, by the way.
Yeah.
And, if you're older, if you're our age and, you've reasonably, settled, you're fine.
I suppose all I'm saying is that, yes, that's all absolutely true, but it's no good suggesting solutions to this, which in practical terms are either never going to happen in this country, or if they were to happen, would take years to install.
Yeah, well, but...
it's a great argument to have, an interesting argument to have.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's got to start somewhere, though.
But in practice, we can't engineer things so we say, okay, take off the foot off the brake entirely, and if people have to walk down the roads with wheelbarrows of money like Weimar Republic, well and good. I mean, that's no good
That's
either.
all we've got at the moment. That's all we're using. We're only using interest rates to try and keep this in check. I guess the argument needs to be, though, is this the only way to go? And I think things do change. We do go through these, periods of, here's the intellectual framework, and this is what we're going to do, and then it slowly shifts across.
But with something like pulling down the trade barriers, for instance, the tariff walls, that's a debate that took 15 years or 20 years to go from the thought columns of the ABC and the Sydney Morning Herald to policy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And then we probably went too far.
Ian, what were the All Ords and the dollar?
So the All Ords today down 1%, 7,559, and the dollar a little bit weaker, 69.30.
Thank you very much.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
There's Ian Verendar, our ABC business editor, and here's Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Now, Milsons Point, we have a multi-car crash on the Bradfield Highway, which is a city-bound run. The lower section opposite Milsons Point Station approaching the Harbour Bridge have stopped all the traffic. Lane 5 or Lane 6 as well, as the fire crews put down some sand to absorb all the fluid leaking out of the cars. Your best bet, use the car, which is the upper section on the freeway, far left, heading towards the CBD. Also, at Villawood, a crash coming through Woodville Road, northbound Villawood Road, and heading down towards Wollongong. Very slow, Heathcote to Waterfall for the Princess Highway. Emergency work, take out lane 2 through Waterfall. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Moz says at least upping the GST is hitting everyone, Richard, not penalising one section of the community, being young mortgage holders. Look, maybe I'm not explaining myself very well. I think some of these ideas are great. I think the GST idea, personally, I think that makes complete sense. I'm just saying... Yes, it's a good argument, and maybe it should happen, but it's not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in this economic cycle. It's not going to solve us from this particular problem. So, let's have a debate about that, and let's do it, and let's push our politicians to do it. But that's a long-term change, right? It's not a thing that's going to help us in this current battle. So, yes, it's a good thing to put forward, but it's also important to see it as a tool that's not available for use right now. I think that's a fair thing to say without... being accused of not understanding the pain that young mortgage holders are under at the moment. I do. It's 26 minutes to 5 here on Drive Some News Headlines. Adam Story, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. An emergency situation is unfolding at a mine site in northwestern Queensland where 2 workers are missing. Paramedics were called to the Dougal River mine site, 70 kilometres northwest of Cloncurry, following reports of a ground collapse. A child's body has been recovered in New Zealand's North Island, taking the death toll from Cyclone Gabrielle to 4. Police say they believe the child was caught in rising floodwaters yesterday in the Hawke's Bay area. The state's Energy Minister, Matt Keane, has announced moves that would sink offshore gas drilling plans between Sydney and Newcastle. It comes after the federal court ratified a decision to revoke the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's decision to reject the controversial PEP 11 project. And Defence has revealed it's examining ways to make Australia's next fleet of warships more lethal. A recent audit has criticised progress on the British-designed Hunter-class frigate program, warning they could be outgunned by enemies. More news at 5.
Available now on ABC Listen. Enjoy our library of great Aussie audiobooks all summer long. Free to stream on the ABC Listen app. With a collection of fiction and non-fiction titles, including Kitty Flanagan's 488 Rules, The Thankless Art of Being Correct, and bridge burning and other hobbies.
The difference between me and every other cute kid, however, was that I had a dad who worked in advertising.
A great range of ABC audiobooks. Free to stream on the ABC Listen app.
Yeah, the day in politics with David Spears in just a second. The forecast for the rest of today, a slight 30% chance of a shower. mainly in the coast. Oh, actually, that's for this morning, so we're past that. We're past that. We'll just do the current temperatures, I think. 26 in the city, 28 in Camden, 24 in Gosford, 22 in Mount Boyce, 29 in Penrith and 26 in Cronulla. Tomorrow, the chance of a fog in the outer west in the early morning. Sunny with a minimum of 18 and a maximum of 28. Friday, mostly sunny, light winds becoming northeasterly 20 to 30 kilometres during the day. On Saturday, a sunny morning with the chance of morning fog in the west, the chance of a thunderstorm in the afternoon and evening. And Sunday, a minimum of 21, a maximum of 29, partly cloudy with the chance of a thunderstorm later in the day. Tom Saunders will have a full forecast for you at about 5:30. 1300 222 702 is the number here on Drive. Just this weird story from the United States. People talk sometimes about cancel culture as if it's all left-wing people cancelling right-wing people. Someone accused me yesterday when I talked about some parents at Scots College being a bit wary of Tony Abbott giving a big speech to their boys. They say, "Oh, you're indulging in cancel culture." It's seen as always something that you supposedly progressive people, I hope I am, do towards right-wing people. Not always the case, though. A concert by the King's Singers at a university in Florida, I read, was cancelled 2 hours before they were due on stage because the college, it's a Pensacola Christian college, suddenly realised that one of them was gay. They're an a cappella singing group, and rumours started spreading among the students that one of them was gay. And this got to the parents, and the parents urgently, got onto the school authorities. And this is this group that was formed in Cambridge back in 1968. It won a Grammy in 2009. Absolutely famous. They perform around the world, and they were about to go on and said, no. The people who booked the King's Singers did not do their due diligence, and several of the students found out that one of the singers in the group is gay. These students started spreading the word around campus, and a group of parents got hold of the information, and they were extremely upset that their kids will be listening to a group sing that has a gay member. What about that? Singing songs sung by a group with one gay member. I would have thought a good a cappella group from Cambridge would have more than one gay member, but there you go. It is 22 minutes to 5 here on ABC Radio Sydney.
Members on my right.
Well, hang on.
Members on my left.
I will not be lectured about sexism.
You sit down, Buffett.
Order.
Mr. Speaker.
Google it, mate.
How pathetic.
What sort of person does that?
Order, Buffett.
David Spears joins us, host of Insiders on ABC TV. David, good afternoon.
Very good afternoon, Richard.
Yeah, we just have Ian Verender's economic perspective on what happened in Canberra today with Philip Lowe. What's your political perspective on how he went?
Well, it was fascinating. I sat in the room for the hour and a half that Philip Lowe was in there taking questions. And I should note this is a bit of a warm-up, I reckon, for a tougher grilling that'll come on Friday. Today was the Senate committee. Friday will be the House of Reps Economics Committee. They've got some more well-credentialed economists, and of course, lower house MPs usually have more skin in the game in terms of angry voters in their electorates giving them direct feedback. But nonetheless, today was fascinating because one of those senators asking him questions is the Greens' Nick McKim, who's been issuing daily demands for the scalp of Philip Lowe. And he probably went in the hardest today. But I've got to say, Phil Lowe looked pretty calm, as he typically does, untroubled by most of the questions, took the opportunity to make a pretty compelling case to consider the alternative here. If you don't get inflation down, and particularly to that target zone, it is going to hit the poorest the hardest. And he came back to that point again and again. And I just don't think the critics, including the Greens, have really laid out what sort of inflation rate they're comfortable with and how they think it would impact on the most vulnerable. So I thought it was a pretty good point that he made.
And as we're discussing, there are alternatives. There are, you could raise the GST, you could make forced savings under the super scheme, you could put in an extra Medicare levy. But, and these tools are a great subject for an intellectual discussion, but they're not particularly available for use right now. And
not by the Reserve Bank. These are all tools of government, right? Yes, the government could increase taxes. It could do something with the GST. It could do all sorts of things. The government looks after fiscal policy, but both Philip Lowe, the Reserve Bank governor, and before him this morning, the head of Treasury, Stephen Kennedy, made the same point. It's not exactly a rapid way of responding to the cycle. Yes, during COVID, it was quick to pump money out the door, but you think about it in the real world. If you're going to increase taxes, you've got to get that through the Parliament, through the Senate. Good luck with that. The lag on these things is enormous when the Reserve Bank can very swiftly move interest rates. Both agree, the Treasury and the Reserve Bank, that this is the better way to go.
In practical terms, the history of this thing in Australia is that GSTs can only be put up after an election. Howard took it to the electorate. It'd be difficult for a government to say, well, if Howard took it to an electorate, took it to an election, we're just going to bring it in mid-term.
And since Kim Beazley, Labor hasn't gone anywhere near it, right? And this has been a long time. I was here, I remember it. But since then, even Bill Shorten, when he took all those other tax changes, negative gearing, capital gains tax, GST was no-go. You wouldn't go near it because of that experience under Beazley. So no.
Which, again, is not to say that it might not be a good idea. It's just to talk about the practicalities of it.
Let's live in the real world for a moment and consider. Now, that's not to say that Philip Lowe doesn't deserve criticism. Yes, I think he's still carrying a lot of baggage for wrongly suggesting to people that he wouldn't lift rates till 2024. Yes, he had to give a bit of a mea culpa today over that private lunch with bankers that he held last week that the Financial Review exposed. And he said, look, the timing was the problem there. We won't do that again. But look, by and large, what he's doing, his point today was, what are the options here? This is a far better alternative to leaving inflation at a level. What are the Greens and others saying? Leave it at 5%, 4%. His point is, if you did that, you would hurt the poor the most. It would exacerbate income inequality.
And look, I don't particularly want to be sitting here being some sort of appointed defender of Philip Lowe, but it is interesting the tone of absolute kind of contempt for him that seems to be around and personal attack. In a circumstance where every similar country in the world has similar settings or has high interest rates and a reserve bank or a central bank which is trying to do something about it.
And most of them higher than the settings here in terms of interest rates. His other point that he made a few times today, in fact, it was his final words before the committee hearing, it's not just me, it's a board of 9. And he suggested that they do make unanimous decisions on all of these interest rate rises over the last year. Now, maybe that's a bit of a naive point to make. I don't think, the tabloids and other critics are going to start identifying all 9 members. He's the guy at the top. He's got to wear it. But he was pleading for a bit of perspective there, that this is a collective decision of a group of people. The other point to make, of course, is the government's reviewing the structure of the RBA. It'll also be reviewing whether Philip Lowe sticks around for another term or not. That'll happen in the coming months. We could see quite a change to the structure of the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, David Spears is with us. Let's listen into the RBA Governor, Philip Lowe. He says that raising interest rates works much faster than fiscal policy to address surging inflation.
At the moment, aggregate demand growth has been too strong, and interest rates are part of the way that we bring that back down again. Interest rates are a nimble policy tool. They're a blunt policy tool, but they're nimble. The received wisdom over recent time is that fiscal policy, most of the time, is not as effective as managing the cycle. Because if you're going to have fiscal measures introduced, it has to go through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and that takes time.
That's Philip Lowe from earlier today. Governor Lowe also mentioned that he shouldn't be considered solely responsible for these decisions, as David mentioned.
It's not just me making these decisions. There are 9 people based on the advice of a large staff. So that's the world we operate in. I'm not complaining about it. That's our job, and it's unpopular. And I accept that. That's why the central bank is independent in its decision-making from the political process. It's easier for me to do unpopular things than it is for maybe some of you. I don't know.
Okay, but I mean, did you see that Media Watch report? He's got reporters camped out outside his house like he's some sort of mass murderer.
I know, and I like that little line there. It's easier for me to do unpopular things than some of you politicians, and he's right. I mean,
well, that's why it's independent. That's the whole point, isn't
it? Exactly. And look, this really isn't easy. Now, like you, I'm saying they got everything right. Maybe there is a case for pausing for a while to see whether inflation is going to come down. But I think he did make a powerful point today that we cannot leave inflation too high. It's way too high now. But even if it settles around 5% or so, that's historically still going to be a problem. So, yeah, I thought that was a point that he made well today.
David Spears is with us, host of Insiders on ABC TV. Meanwhile, the Greens are attempting to get a moratorium on new coal and gas plants from the government. They've always had this kind of uneasy relationship. They want to not be blockers as they have possibly been in previous administrations, but they also want to try to push the government a little.
Yeah, and this comes back to, I guess, memories of 2009 when the Greens blocked the Rudd government's CPRS, the first iteration of an emissions trading scheme in Australia. Didn't get through because the Greens and the Abbott opposition, the coalition, opposed it, and we didn't get anything done really on meaningful climate action for years after that. So those memories are still there. Look, what we're talking about here with the safeguards mechanism, this is the main pathway for the government to achieve its climate targets of 43% by 2030, net zero by 2050. And if they can't get it through, well, they're in all sorts of strife. So look, the coalition have said no, they're not going to back it. Despite the fact that every business group reckons they should. This was actually the idea of the Business Council to do it this way. For the Greens, well, look, you can sort of see where they're coming from. They've got a pretty clear line: no new coal, no new gas. But, does that mean blocking this altogether? They haven't quite said they would go that far. The argument from the government, well, look, do this, we can have the argument about going further, but at least let's get this in place.
And I guess the argument, some people say that we can't, enthusiastic though we all are for renewables, it's a process. It's not something that can be done overnight. And you don't want a situation where Australian manufacturing, something like a brick plant, is forced to close down because they can't get cheap enough gas to operate the thing.
Yeah, and look, there'll be people listening who'll go, hang on, pumped hydro and batteries can already do it at a reasonable price. Most of the experts that the government has in the energy market, though, are saying gas in particular is going to be with us for some years to come. That's the reality of the formal advice they're getting. So, no, they don't want to transition away from that too quickly.
Let's listen, though, to the Greens, to the spokesperson on mining and resources, Dorinda Cox.
Our position is very clear that we do not want any more new coal and gas mines open up in this country. We're in the middle of a climate crisis and we can't continue to pour petrol on the fire. We want to work with the government and we've offered to pass this legislation, but we need to see real action on there being no new coal and gas opened up in this country. We'll continue those negotiations. This has been a very kind offer that we've put on the table to the government to overlook other components of this legislation.
Well, there you go. A kind offer, says Dorinda Cox. What does the opposition say? Well, actually, let's listen from the government first. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, says the government is open to negotiation but won't compromise on their election mandate.
Look, I found the Greens obviously throw both the climate change bill and the energy relief package willing to talk on matters of good faith. There are matters we disagree with. They're different political parties, with different agendas. We respect theirs and they respect ours. Where we can come together, we'll continue to do so. Ultimately, they have a party room. The leader of the Greens can put a position to his party room. He knows how to navigate through his party room better than I do. But speaking on behalf of the government, we will not agree to anything not in keeping with our election mandate.
There's Chris Bowen for the government. So what does the opposition say? Here's Susan Lee on Sky this morning.
I want to send a clear warning to Labor. Do not sell off regional jobs and regional industries in the Hunter, in Queensland, in Western Australia for dodgy deals with the Greens in order to get this legislation through the Parliament. Do not sell off the future of our regions and the prosperity of our regional communities. Well, we don't support the policy because it is effectively a tax on business.
There you go. There's Susan Lee on Sky. We're with David Spears from Insiders on ABC TV. David, the other big story today, story really this month are these swirling allegations that in the UK and Australia there may have been instances where former ADF personnel have gone to China to train particularly pilots in the operation of military aircraft.
Yeah, and even someone being held in detention in Australia in relation to this, an American citizen, as I understand it. So, look, yes, they've got to be absolutely careful that this isn't happening. It kind of beggars belief. It's a bit mind-boggling that it would happen, right? But
Where's your loyalty? You know, you've served your country. You know, presumably with distinction. You've been paid to do it. You've been trained very well, and then you go and deal with the country that is obviously one of the countries we're worried about.
Yeah, exactly. And look, there are provisions in law to prevent that happening, but presumably, if any of that needs to be tightened up, that will happen.
Yeah, well, let's listen to the Defence Minister, Richard Marles. He's announced this tightening of laws to ensure retired military personnel will protect national security secrets.
Firstly, everyone who's a part of the Australian Defence Force right now knows what's expected of them. So I want that to be really clear. We do have very robust policies and law in place when people become in possession of one of our nation's secrets. But the report did recommend that we develop legislation to remove any doubt around the full breadth of that, of the secrets that need to be maintained. And yes, we will be developing that legislation.
Yeah, there's Richard Marles. And I'm sure that's one of the issues where he's going to absolutely have the support of the opposition.
Yeah, there's that, and also removing these Chinese-made security cameras that apparently have been sitting for years in MPs, electorate offices and other government departments and so on. So on all sorts of fronts, yes, they're constantly having to... It's a game of cat and mouse, right? Keep up with the threats and the potential challenges they're facing.
Isn't it? I've forgotten the figure. Is it 88 cameras were inside parliamentary offices? Whoops.
Yeah, but I should point out the Liberals made a big song and dance about this the other day. But these cameras, as far as I'm aware, were sitting there, and advice was given to the then coalition government to do something about them for quite some time.
Yeah, well, it's like the Huawei thing, isn't it? It's like letting the Russians run your postal service during the Cold War. It's not a great idea. Hey, thanks so much.
Thanks, Richard.
There's the host of Insiders. And you'll see that program on ABC TV on Sunday. And if you're not near a TV set, of course, you can listen to the audio on News Radio. 8 minutes to 5 is the time here on ABC Radio Sydney. Quick check of the traffic if you're battling around on the roads, and then we'll have the day in sport.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
By the way, a fascinating Self-Improvement Wednesday coming up at about 5:15. We're going to go back to the world of ancient Rome and talk about how education was done in ancient Rome. We'll talk a bit about primary schools and boys and girls and all of that sort of stuff. But we're also going to talk about what happened in secondary school, which was an intense focus on what you could call mock trials, in which they'd kind of be... They represent lawyers dealing with various crimes. But the crimes were made up, and the law was made up too. It was all set on this sort of fantasy kingdom that they created, with its own laws and its own problems and its own principles. Why was that chosen as the way to teach young Romans, how to be good citizens? That's your lesson in Self-Improvement Wednesday at about 5:15. Currently, 7 minutes to 5. Not too bad on the roads. Milsons Point, Warringah Freeway, just past the High Street overpass. 4 vehicles involved in an accident there. 1 of 4 southbound lanes closed. That's lane 5. And at Beverly Hills, King George's Road at Stony Creek Road, a truck breakdown with 1 of 4 northbound lanes closed. That's lane 1. That's the latest here on Drive.
The quest for the big brass mug continues. On the new season of Hard Quiz, award-winning comedian Tom Gleeson is throwing down the gauntlet to some new contestants.
You made that sound really creepy.
And challenging some more unusual expert subjects.
Just when you thought things wouldn't get weirder, Sam, colonoscopies is your expert.
The new season of Hard Quiz.
Nothing's weird on this show, mate.
Wednesday nights on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
And it's David Mark, our ABC National Sports reporter. Good afternoon.
Hey, Richard. How you going?
Good. Now, Australia's women's cricket team have a win over Bangladesh.
Yeah, in the T20 World Cup in South Africa. So Bangladesh batted first. They scored 107 in their 20 overs. And the interesting news there is that Georgia Wareham, who's a leg spin bowler, hasn't played for Australia for 16 months, came back for her first game in that time, and she took 3 wickets for 20 runs. So that's a great way to come back. And then in reply, Australia, it wasn't massively easy, but they did score the runs in 18.2 overs. They lost 2 wickets. Meg Lanning, the captain, is in good form, and she scored 48 in her return. She's returning to cricket for this competition. So Australia at the moment undefeated in the competitions. Early days yet, but they're looking to defend the T20 crown they won 3 years ago at the MCG.
Yeah, good luck to them. Now, the launch of the Super Rugby season today.
Yeah, and that's a week or so away from starting. It starts on, I think, Friday week. And I went along to the launch today, mainly because it was at the Opera House, so it was a nice day for it. But really all the talk is about the World Cup, which is going to be held in September this year in France. And, of course, Eddie Jones is back as the Australian coach. So it was really interesting to talk to the captains and the coaches of the Super Rugby Pacific competition about how they're feeling about this World Cup year and how they kind of, try to keep their minds on the job at hand, which is the Super Rugby competition, while every single player is thinking in the back of their minds about how, they want to get selected in Eddie Jones' side to play in the World Cup. And, for instance, I had a chat to Jake Gordon, the New South Wales Waratahs coach, and he sort of said, look, he's made the mistake in the past of concentrating too much on trying to get selected for the World Cup only to not get selected. So, yeah, you got to think about the job at hand. But it's going to begin in a week and a bit, and the Brumbies are playing the Waratahs at the football stadium to kick things off. And Richard, I might just chat very quickly about an event coming up tomorrow too in terms of launches, and that is the Cup of Nations, the soccer tournament involving women's soccer teams from around the world and Australia. Starts tomorrow in Gosford with Spain playing Jamaica and Australia playing the Czech Republic, and then there are games on in Sydney on Sunday and then in Newcastle next Wednesday.
Okay, now in the AFL, Toby Green announced as the solo captain of the Greater Western Sydney Giants.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because Green was a co-captain last year with Stephen Coniglio and Josh Kelly, and prior to that, Coniglio had been a sole captain. So there were three captains, but new coach this year at the Greater Western Sydney Giants, and he, Adam Kingsley, has decided basically, no, we're just going to have one, go with the old model, and it's going to be Toby Green. And it's an interesting choice because, Toby Green, for so many people outside of the Giants, see him as the bad boy of Australian football. He's probably one of the most reviled figures in the game, and yet internally at the Greater Western Sydney Giants, he's hugely admired. And so in some ways, it's not at all surprised to see him as the captain. It's really exciting news for him. He's had his problems in the AFL. He's been suspended so many times and so on. But as I said, he's very admired in the club. Bit tough for Josh Kelly and Steve Coniglio, who had been captains, but they'll be vice captains. And just by the way, the Swans haven't announced who their captains will be this year, but there's no reason to think that they'll move on from the three co-captains that they have, Luke Parker, Dane Rampy and Callum Mills.
Yeah. Hey, good on you, David. Thank you.
No worries, Richard.
David Mark, our ABC National Sports reporter. I mentioned the story about the Cambridge Group, which has been around since the 60s, the King's Singers. They're very famous for beautiful a cappella music. They've won Grammy Awards and all that sort of stuff. And they've been, the news today is that they've been told by Pensacola Christian College in Florida that they can't perform. They were given 2 hours warning, cancelled with 2 hours warning because they'd discovered that one of the members, I think there's about sort of 8 of them in the group, one of them's gay. And that shocking news was enough to cause the parents to go into paroxysms that it's just a concert of songs, right? It wasn't a lecture or anything, a concert of songs. But somehow the students, just the fact that the guy was gay was enough to send them into paroxysm. Lucy in Chatswood said, would these parents be the same parents who emptied school libraries in America of books that have been read for generations, including their generation, thereby proving nothing happens to you by reading the said books? That's from Lucy in Chatswood. The subject of the ADF personnel, or the suggestions that ADF personnel, very limited numbers, of course, most are completely 99.999, very loyal, but some suggestion that in both the UK and here, that some people have been selling their skills to China. People going to China to train pilots are loyal. They're loyal to the almighty dollar, says Gaz. Capitalism is alive and well in China, it appears. And whilst they're tightening the rules for the ADF, can they tighten the rules for what politicians do after politics? That's from David on the text. In terms of the mortgages and being a young person who's got a mortgage and suffering from these rates, there's a great message on that from David in Arncliffe, which I might share to you because I can hear share to you in a moment because I can hear the news coming up. Lots coming up. Kathleen Folbig inquiry and that great Self-Improvement Wednesday. But some news first. It's 5 o'clock.